Welcome back to GB News Breakfast, a slightly different programme, of course, as we are open-ended and rolling with all of the breaking developments coming out of the Middle East. There have been many this morning, and one that we want to bring you right up to speed with is an attack on the Aramco oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. Take a look at these images. The Saudi Defence Ministry saying that a small fire has been contained at the facilities. Does that look like a small fire to you? For our radio audience travelling into work or wherever you are this morning, there are huge plumes of thick smoke coming from that oil facility, and indeed we've had it confirmed by Aramco that they have now closed down the refinery. That is of great concern, understandably, because in conjunction with the strike on this oil facility, there have been oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, in the Oman Straits as well, that have been targeted yesterday by the Iranians, a number of direct strikes on these vessels. The oil price, understandably, has risen quite significantly, so real concern. And that affects you and me, all of us here in the UK, in terms of fuel prices. So we'll keep you right up to date with all the latest happenings in the Middle East. But you're looking there at images of the Aramco oil refinery struck, it seems, by an Iranian drone. That oil refinery now ablaze.
Yeah, and we just have been hearing from Aramco in the last hour saying it's been shut as a precautionary measure after it was hit by a drone. They also go on to say that it's not clear whether it's two further drones, but two drones were also intercepted at Aramco's facility. No civilians have been killed. That's what they've said this morning. Reading Standard, Robert Fox and GB News' very own Dawn Neeson. Morning, you
Morning.
three.
A finer panel you could not wish to have.
And you will not
on a morning
find.
like this.
You will not find. Robert, let's start with you and the Aramco oil facility. Have we got those pictures that we can get up again? It's one of the largest oil hubs in the world. We've also just seen a video of the mass evacuation of staff from this site. What does this mean for us?
Well, it does mean, as Mark has been saying, we're in for an oil spike. We're in an oil crisis, and you have to link it with the warning off shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, and we know two have been struck under mysterious circumstances. One had to be evacuated. An Iranian shadow fleet, so-called, tanker, obviously probably to or from China, which now comes into play because it's a main client of sanctioned Iranian oil. And I think this is where we see the crisis, the war, go truly global.
Well, in a worrying development, Robert, you said to us off camera just a few minutes ago that you're hearing from a source that what we might be witnessing is the aftermath of a strike from the Houthis, another proxy group, terror group, linked to Iran out of Yemen. I mean, these groups have been notable in the first couple of days of this war, with their lack of activity, but it now seems we've got Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, now the Houthis in Yemen, getting into the fight. If this has come from Yemen, they're certainly much closer to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it was quite precise, the report. It was falling debris, which can be almost as dangerous as the projectile, as the explosive part of the drone falling on the thing, starting this fire, which seems certainly in its implications to have been considerable. And it happened within hours of Hezbollah getting involved. I'm sorry, journalists are very poor prophets and predictors, but as I've been saying since yesterday, I think we're going to get the conflict will peak between now and Wednesday, given what we know about the limitations of Iranian stocks of drones, but above all, missiles. And I think it's a pretty desperate game that they're playing. And we have to look, you use the awful word, asymmetric again, and I think that I fear, because their groups, their sleeper groups are widespread, particularly through southern Europe, expect something else as well.
What do you mean by that?
A terrorist attack.
Tobias, do you agree with that assessment?
I would. I mean, just firstly on the attack on Abqaiq, I visited the facilities after the 2019 attack. Remember, it was attacked then. I think by the Houthis too. So the idea that they have now followed up on this is very plausible indeed. The significance to Saudi Arabia cannot be overstated. It's, as you say, the largest oil refinery in the world. This is what keeps Saudi Arabia going, keeps the money coming in. And 90% of Saudi Arabia's oil goes out the Straits of Hormuz, and this is asymmetric. This is the grey zone warfare. It's moving away from attacking military targets, political targets, and so forth, to infrastructure as well. Iran knows that if it tries to hit Israel, what an incredible air defense that country has. These other countries, they don't have that. And I couldn't understand when I visited Abqaiq, this oil refinery, I asked that question. Why don't you have Patriots here? Why don't you have these the air defences, as we don't here in the UK, by the way? And they said, yes, we need to look into that. And I think they will now be asking themselves, why didn't they invest more? But we're going to see more of this. Yeah. Right across Kuwait, right at UAE, and indeed Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. This is where Iran is going to focus on.
It's such an obvious target. It could bring the world to its knees. And if you're talking about how it's going to affect us here at home, when it was targeted in 2019, it halved Saudi Arabia's crude output and saw the biggest surge in oil prices since the Gulf War. Basra
will be next, but that's the other main facilities for many countries indeed that we know of all because of the Iraq war. Massive concentration of refining capability and a junction, the port from which many of these ships then go through the Straits. So I suspect that's where Iran will be focusing next.
Well, we're joined now by the Minister for North Africa and the Middle East, Hamish Faulkner. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, Minister. Can I just ask you, with these reports now that RAF Akrotiri has come under drone attack last night, with more in the way of attacks on Bahrain, the British facility there, of course, with hundreds of personnel still in that locale. We've got oil and gas facilities now in Saudi Arabia coming under attack. When has the British government got to get off the fence here and actually support the United States wholeheartedly in this military operation?
Mark, the British government is not on the fence. Throughout the weekend, we have been taking action to shoot down drones.
So you support the action by the United States then, Minister?
Let me be clear, Mark. As the Prime Minister set out yesterday, we were not part of the first wave of attacks by Israel and the United States. We had a preference for a diplomatic process on resolving the issues like the nuclear program. But in the face of reckless Iranian attacks, and you've just described some of them, there are attacks which are threatening hotels, airports, of course, the many hundreds of thousands of British nationals who are in the region. We assess it's about 300,000. More than 100,000 have been in touch with the Foreign Office over the course of the weekend. In the face of those missile attacks, that recklessness on the part of the Iranians, we have given a specific and limited agreement to our United States allies in order that action can be taken against those missile launches.
But, so you're calling it a reckless attack, and yet it's still remaining specific and limited defensive action. At what point, if any, then, is the UK going to join the US in offensive action?
Iranian attacks are reckless. The agreement we have with the United States is specific and limited, just to distinguish between the two.
But at what point, if at any point, is the UK going to join the US in offensive action?
We are supporting the Americans to take action against the missiles and capability of the Iranians to threaten our allies, our nationals, and our interests. That is a specific and limited agreement which we've kept under review, and if we have further updates, we will bring them forward in the usual way.